Few questions linger with humanity as persistently as this: what awaits us after death? For some, it's a mystery that breeds fear. For others, a silent beacon of hope. But when someone like Cayce shares glimpses of what he witnessed and felt upon entering states of profound consciousness, even the most skeptical among us pause to lend an ear. Famed for his unique ability to tap into information while asleep, he recounted experiences that transcended the limits of ordinary sight. And among all his messages, one particular vision resonated deeply within the hearts of countless individuals. It wasn't a dire prediction of doom, but rather a serene, luminous, and almost familiar depiction of a realm many affectionately call heaven. What Cayce said wasn't designed to persuade, but to console. He didn't dwell on rigid promises or dogmas, but on a reality that unveiled itself clearly to anyone willing to listen with an open heart. This vision doesn't merely speak of life beyond death. It speaks to the life we can still embrace with greater lightness and diminished fear. According to heaven wasn't a physical location defined by pearly gates or streets paved with gold. Instead, it was a state of consciousness where the spirit rediscovers its authentic essence. He portrayed a realm of immense peace, devoid of judgment or punishment, and filled only with learning and acceptance. In this realm, each soul was embraced with unconditional love, regardless of their past experiences or missteps during their earthly journey. This description became profoundly comforting because it excluded absolutely no one. It was an accessible heaven, attainable not through earned merit, but simply because we are all integral parts of something far grander. Often, we associate the notion of heaven with fixed images ingrained in us since childhood or reinforced through religious ceremonies. But Cayce shattered these conventional images, offering something far more personal and intimate. He spoke of encounters with individuals who had already passed on, not as frightening apparitions, but as deeply emotional reunions. He described environments teeming with lush nature, bathed in soft, gentle light, and radiating a feeling of belonging that defies description. Everything there seemed to recognize the individual, not for their flaws or shortcomings, but for their purest, most essential self. What was most striking wasn't the visual splendor of these places, but the complete absence of fear, pain, or loneliness. It was as if the spirit was returning to a home it had long forgotten. And for those who currently grapple with anxieties about what lies ahead, hearing such accounts can profoundly reshape their perspective on living, because it's not about blind faith, but about considering that perhaps, just perhaps, we are not as lost as we might believe. Another significant aspect of Cayce's accounts was the concept of continuity. He didn't view death as a definitive end, but as a transition, a crossing over. According to him, upon departing the physical body, the soul experiences a brief moment of recognition, akin to awakening from a deep slumber. In that instant, it realizes that it remains alive, conscious, and capable of reflecting on its existence. Cayce said that many were surprised to find that their thoughts and emotions remained active, but now unburdened by the constraints of the body and the pressures of earthly life. This continuity offered solace to many who feared vanishing into oblivion. On the contrary, he spoke of a more expansive living where everything we are continues to evolve, learn, and connect with other souls. For him, heaven was also a place for reunions, mutual learning, and, above all else, profound peace. This imbued both living and death with meaning, presenting them as two facets of the same journey. There is something incredibly powerful in envisioning that at the end of this life, we will encounter not judgment, but understanding. Cayce said that many souls arrived in heaven burdened with guilt, fear, and sadness, but upon being welcomed, they began to perceive their experiences in a new light. He spoke of spiritual counselors who assisted these souls in reflecting on their choices, not with punishment, but with compassion and empathy. It was like a grand school of the soul, where each individual gained a deeper understanding of what they had lived through, where they had faltered, and how they could evolve. This process wasn't automatic or imposed. The soul actively participated with freedom and awareness. This profoundly altered the conventional notion of eternal punishment. Instead, a continuous path of growth emerged, extending even beyond death. This vision didn't deny the reality of human errors, but demonstrated that there is always an opportunity for a fresh start. For older folks burdened by the weight of difficult decisions, hearing this can offer a renewed sense of relief. It wasn't solely about comforting, but about embracing a new way of living in the present moment. If everything we do carries continuity, if every thought and action accompanies us after death, then it becomes all the more worthwhile to nurture what we cultivate within ourselves. What Cayce insisted that heaven begins to take shape here on earth when we learn to forgive, to understand, and to accept our shared humanity. He said that the most serene souls after death were those who had already embarked on this process during their lifetime. And this didn't demand perfection, merely a willingness to look more kindly upon oneself and others. The message he imparted wasn't just about what awaits us later, but about how to live more fully now. If death isn't the end, but a continuation, then every present moment gains immense value. Living well, according to him, was about preparation to find oneself in a realm where everything ultimately makes sense. In many accounts shared by individuals who have had near-death experiences, there is a recurring theme: a welcoming light, a feeling of absolute love, an encounter with something greater than words can ever capture. Edgar Cayce, in his Altered States of Consciousness, described something remarkably similar. There wasn't a throne, there weren't stern figures awaiting answers, but there was a presence, something he called divine consciousness, that enveloped us with understanding. This presence didn't judge harshly, but observed with profound depth. It was as if our whole life was shown with care, not to punish us, but to help us understand what we can still improve. A welcoming presence for many who grow old with fear of what they will find on the other side. This image offers relief. It's like knowing that we won't be forgotten or abandoned, and that everything we've lived through has value. And the most beautiful thing, no one arrives alone. There is always someone waiting, someone who recognizes us and calls us by name. What Cayce believed was that before reincarnating, souls choose their experiences based on what they need to learn. But after death, there is a pause, a time of serene evaluation where the soul has space to breathe, reflect, and, above all, rest. For him, this interval is fundamental because it's where the spirit recovers its energy and clarity. It's in this place, which he called the spiritual plane, that we meet again those we love and who have passed on before. Many people have reported that upon hearing these messages, they felt as if a weight had been lifted off their shoulders, because it wasn't necessary to understand everything or to have lived a perfect life. It was only necessary to be willing to continue living. This idea becomes especially touching when we get older and begin to question what we have done, what we have failed to do, or who we were. Knowing that there is time, that there is continuation, and that we are guided with patience is like a breath of calm for the soul. Stages of heaven. In his vision, heaven was made of stages. There wasn't a single fixed place for everyone, but different levels of experience according to the consciousness of each soul. This wasn't a classification of better or worse, but a natural reflection of what each one carried internally. Cayce described that some souls arrived on the spiritual plane with so much confusion that they needed more time to orient themselves. Others arrived in peace and soon felt ready to move on. But in all cases, there was assistance, beings of light, as he called them, who had as their mission to help in this process. Nothing was imposed. Everything happened with respect and free will. This vision helps to reduce the anxiety of those who fear not being prepared, for according to Cayce, no one is left behind. Each soul receives the necessary care in the right time, with love and understanding. For seniors who carry difficult memories, this idea can be an unexpected and very welcome balm. An important point in his accounts was that the soul maintains its connections. The bonds formed in life don't break with death. On the contrary, they are strengthened on another level. Cayce said that true love continues to vibrate even after the body departs. Those we love don't disappear. They just change a state and often continue to be by our side, accompanying us in silence. This doesn't mean hauntings or strange presences, but rather a subtle connection, which can be felt in moments of intense longing, strong intuition, or even in dreams. For those who have already lost loved ones, this idea is deeply comforting. We are not alone even when we believe that we are. And when our time comes, we will also be received by familiar faces, by voices that are familiar to us. Death ceases to be an abyss and becomes a crossing, where reunion becomes a natural part of the path. A dynamic heaven in addition to peace and acceptance. Cayce spoke of a heaven where learning didn't cease. Souls continued to evolve, studying, contributing to others, sharing experiences. It was like a large community of spirits, each on their journey, but all connected by the same purpose, to grow in consciousness. This dismantles the idea of a static heaven where everything stops and becomes a senseless eternity. On the contrary, there was movement, joy, constant discoveries. For him, heaven wasn't the end of the journey, but the beginning of a new stage, broader and clearer. Old age, which sometimes brings the feeling that everything has already been lived, gains new meaning in light of this vision, because getting older is not ending a story, but preparing to continue it on another plane. It's like changing rooms in the same house, and knowing this, according to many who heard Cayce, can transform the way we see our own final days. Simplicity and accessibility. There is a deep simplicity in the way Cayce spoke about heaven. He didn't use difficult words, nor did he try to impress with complicated concepts. He simply conveyed what he saw with clarity and serenity, and perhaps that's what touched so many people the most. The idea that heaven is within everyone's reach without distinction. It's not necessary to belong to a specific religion or to follow rigid rules. What matters, according to him, is what we cultivate within us. Compassion, humility, honesty, a sincere desire to learn and improve. These are the true passports to that place of light he described. It's not about being perfect, but about seeking, even with mistakes and stumbles, a more conscious path. And if that's the case, then heaven already begins here in small gestures, in simple choices, in the way we treat others and ourselves. Aging as preparation. Spiritual life, said Cayce, is not separate from real life. It starts exactly where we are. As people age, many begin to rethink their priorities, revisit their memories, and evaluate the meaning of the time they've living. Cayce's vision offers a fresh perspective on this process. He spoke of how each phase of life has unique value, and that aging, far from being a limitation, is a preparation for spiritual awakening. In his words, the final years are like a serene sunset that precedes an unknown but beautiful dawn. And this new dawn, for him, wasn't an empty promise. It was a real, tangible continuity where everything we've learned now takes on a renewed and profound purpose. What Cayce offered was that many older adults already hold within themselves a wealth of wisdom, knowledge that proves invaluable on the other side, because what is accumulated within our consciousness is never truly lost. This lends new weight to the very concept of time itself. Each conversation, every moment of quiet reflection, each act of forgiveness given or received, all carry inherent value. Nothing is ever wasted, as everything serves to prepare us for that next grand stage. For those who harbor regrets, Cayce's message rings especially true. He shared that, on the other side, there is no condemnation, but rather boundless opportunity. The soul is given a chance to fully understand the reasons behind each and every action and to transform whatever caused pain or suffering. There is no court of judgment, but instead a mirror reflecting not only what we did, but also what we felt, what we earnestly tried to do, and what we left unsaid. And within that reflection, we come to see ourselves more deeply and profoundly than ever before. A mirror of understanding. This image might initially seem harsh, but as Cayce described it, it is accompanied by such profound acceptance that all fear simply dissolves away. The very idea that it's never too late to gently adjust the course of the soul brings a sense of hope to those who carry old burdens. It's not about erasing the past, but about understanding it with greater clarity and utilizing that understanding as a foundation to move forward. According to him, eternity is crafted from continuous opportunities for learning and evolution. One of the most frequently asked questions that Cayce received revolved around loved ones. Where are they? How are they doing? Do they see us? Do they await us? And he responded with a calm reassurance that true love is never, ever lost. The souls that loved us during our living continue to accompany us, cheering us on from the sidelines, lending a helping hand whenever possible. They don't interfere with our choices, but offer their unwavering presence. He said that in many cases, these presences are felt during the most unexpected moments. A sudden, vivid memory, a bright and colorful dream, a feeling of warmth that spreads throughout the chest. This should never be a cause for fear, but rather a source of comfort. Knowing that we are never truly alone, even during the most difficult of days, can fundamentally change the way we live. And when the time inevitably comes to depart, we won't be going to an empty place. We will be received with joy, with recognition, with that kind of heartfelt hug that only those who truly love us know how to give. For those who are aging and feeling the sting of loss, this comforting vision is a true gift. A personalized spiritual path. Cayce also emphasized that each and every soul has its own unique rhythm. There is no sense of hurry or comparison on the spiritual plane. Each one walks according to their own individual needs, their pains, and their discoveries. This is important to fully understand, especially when living in a world that places such high value on productivity and immediate results. In the heaven that what Cayce described, time operated differently. There was no urgency, only presence. Each soul could breathe deeply, reflect inwardly, and reorganize itself internally. And this process happened with unwavering support and loving guidance. There were beings that he described as wise and loving, beings whose sole mission was to help other souls find themselves once again. This brings with it a feeling of profound relief. We are not being cast into a new world without a map. We are always being guided. Even those who departed this life with fear or confusion, according to Cayce, find this support. No soul is ever truly alone. Heaven, for him, was also a network of acceptance where everyone possesses inherent value and where everything ultimately makes sense. Perhaps one of the most touching aspects of Cayce's message is the very idea that heaven is built from this moment forward. He said that our attitudes here in this life define what we will feel when we cross the veil of death, not as a form of punishment, but as a natural consequence of what we carry deep within. If we cultivate kindness, compassion, and truth, we will find ourselves in an environment that is compatible with those virtues. If we carry resentment and fear, we will need more time to adjust, but we will never be lost or abandoned. Heaven is, therefore, also an inner construction, and this construction is carefully made in the smallest of details, in a word spoken with respect, in a gesture of forgiveness, in a look of deep empathy. Building heaven now. Cayce didn't sell an easy salvation, but rather showed that everything ultimately depends on how we live in this very moment. And this gives us back a sense of control. Even at an advanced age, there is still so much to plant, and every seed of love that is sown here will undoubtedly blossom on the other side. This certainty strengthens and consoles us. He didn't deny that the end of physical life could be painful, especially when there is suffering, limitations, or losses. But he insisted that this end was not a punishment, but a gentle transition. Pain, according to him, is fleeting, and the soul is soon enveloped by a peace that surpasses any human understanding. Many of those who heard his messages began to face death with less fear, not because they stopped feeling, but because they began to understand. Understanding the process, even if only partially, already brings a different kind of tranquility. And that's exactly what Cayce offered: understanding. Death ceases to be a taboo subject and becomes part of life as an expected, natural, and even welcome estate, not as an escape, but as a return to our true home. For many older adults, this brings a new perspective on what can still be lived, because if there is continuity, then there is still purpose to be found. And living with purpose, even in the last chapters of our lives, is what gives dignity to the journey. A fearless perspective. One of Cayce's most valuable contributions was removing the weight of beliefs that were based on fear. He didn't speak of eternal hell or of irreversible punishments. His message was simple and direct. Every soul possesses inherent value, and all experiences have a purpose. Even mistakes, when seen with awareness and understanding, become invaluable instruments of growth. For him, there was no waste on the spiritual path. Everything we feel, suffer, or learn serves to shape the spirit, and this makes even the most difficult moments take on a new and profound meaning. What Cayce didn't ask for blind faith, but for attentive and open listening. He said that if we allow ourselves to reflect with an open heart, inherent value, and all experiences have a purpose. Even mistakes, when seen with awareness and understanding, become invaluable instruments of growth. For him, there was no waste on the spiritual path. Everything we feel, suffer, or learn serves to shape the spirit, and this makes even the most difficult moments take on a new and profound meaning. What Cayce didn't ask for blind faith, but for attentive and open listening. He said that if we allow ourselves to reflect with an open heart, we will know what is true. This way of thinking resonates with many who, as they age, have moved away from rigid ideas and seek something more human, more direct. It is possible to believe without fear. It is possible to live the end of life with serenity, without the feeling of spiritual debt. This in itself is already a liberation. Another image he used frequently was that of a large spiritual library, where each soul could access the records of its own history. He called these records soul archives, and said that in them were all our experiences, intentions, learnings, and challenges. The reading of these records was not done by a judge, but by ourselves. It was an act of lucidity, not of condemnation. This allows the soul to deeply understand everything it has lived through and to choose with more awareness what it wishes to live next. A meaningful path, this vision transforms heaven into a place of wisdom and autonomy. Aging with this idea is different. It removes the weight of others' judgment and returns to the person the power to understand their trajectory with clarity. Even if there are regrets, there are also successes, overcoming challenges and courage, and all of this matters. Life ceases to be an accumulation of errors and reveals itself as a path full of meaning and potential. In the final years of living, many people face silence, distant children, slower routines, absences that hurt. And in this silence, profound reflections arise. What did I do? What did I fail to do? What awaits me? What Cayce never promised easy answers, but said that this silence is also a preparation. It is in recollection that the soul begins to reorganize itself, to open itself to what comes next. He spoke of the importance of saying goodbye to life with gratitude, not with fear, of looking at the days lived as one looks at a photo album, recognizing the beauty even in the most difficult pages. The vision of heaven as a reunion with who we truly are helps to transform silence into peace. It's not about giving up on life, but about preparing to continue on another plane. And this preparation can be done with dignity, with calm, with conscious choices. Beyond physical limitations for those who live with illnesses, physical limitations, or constant pain, what Cayce also left an important message. He said that the body is only a temporary instrument, and that the soul is not affected by its failures. Pain does not define who we are. When the body can no longer sustain life, the soul is released with lightness, and what seemed like senseless suffering reveals itself as part of a cycle of learning. Nothing is in vain. What Cayce reported that many souls, upon leaving the body, felt an enormous sense of relief, as if they were enveloped by a loving and silent presence that removed all the weight they had lived through. For those who are bedridden or suffer when seeing a loved one in this situation, this message can bring real comforting vision. Knowing that the end of the body is the beginning of the soul's freedom can transform anguish into acceptance. It is not necessary to understand everything. Just trust that there is something beyond, and that this beyond welcomes us with wisdom and care. Heaven begins now, and for those who are still here, walking, waiting, caring, or just trying to live one day at a time, what Cayce's message continues to live on. He reminded us that heaven doesn't begin at death. It begins in the gesture, in the word, in the thought. It begins when we choose peace instead of conflict, when we practice forgiveness, when we seek to understand instead of judge. Heaven, for him, is an internal construction that accompanies us wherever we go. This means that even in old age, there is still time to cultivate light. There is still time to care for the soul. And this care is simple: honesty with oneself, compassion with others, gratitude for life. These are small attitudes, but which, according to Cayce, are greatly reflected on the other side. Aging, then, becomes a path of improvement, not an end. It is the moment to integrate everything that has been lived and to prepare lightly for what is still to come. If you've made it this far, it's a sign that something inside you recognizes truth in the words of this message. Perhaps you remembered someone who passed away or reflected on your own life with more affection. Perhaps you are feeling relief or simply curiosity. The important thing is that you allowed yourself to listen, and that's already an important step. The message that Edgar Cayce left wasn't made to scare or impose, but to comforting vision, to remind us that even in the face of death, there is beauty, purpose, and continuity, and that no one needs to go through this stage with fear.